Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our new episode of the Global Energy Week webinar series. We are thrilled to have three speakers from GLJ joining us today to talk about how we can drive decarbonization through select technologies. Sustainability and decarbonization are now at the forefront of the energy industry's agenda as we strive to build a greener and more sustainable future. So we are very much excited to hear today from Jodi Anhorn, President and CEO at GLJ, Colleen Sherry, Vice President, Sustainability and Emissions Management, and John Hirschmiller, Senior Geologist at GLJ. We'll start with the presentation, and in the meantime, dear audience, please do not hesitate to post your questions to our guest speakers. And Jodi, Colleen, and John, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Nadia, and the ability to get in front of the group and speak. Really appreciate that. So, as mentioned, good afternoon, or if you're with us in North America, good morning. But depending on where you're joining from us, obviously, it's a Friday yet, and thanks a bunch for taking some time out of your day to share with us. We want to discuss some of the emerging technologies that we're seeing employed in the goals of decarbonization and sustainability in many areas around the world. We see this in support of many multiple heavy industries, including the energy industry, which is sort of where GLJ's roots are, all with the goal to reduce our environmental impact, including greenhouse and methane gas emissions. So as mentioned, my name is Jodi Anhorn. I'm the president at GLJ. We are a Calgary-based independent consulting firm, and with me today is Colleen and John, which we'll give them the floor here in just a minute. So today, as mentioned, we want to share with you some of what we're seeing across multiple industries and their goals and practical applications in these technologies, with an eye on sustainability. But before we get heavy into the topic, it's always nice to know a little bit about the presenters. So I'll just take a couple quick slides here to share with you some of GLJ's background in supporting our clients in their multiple sustainability efforts. So if you can kick that off, John.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And maybe just go to the next slide. Okay, so here's a little bit about GLJ's background. As mentioned, we're based out of Calgary here in Canada. Been in operation now for a little bit over 50 years. Very technically strong group based in the subsurface, largely made up of engineers, geoscientists, business and sustainability professionals. The roots of the company really go back to that strength in the subsurface set, traditional oil and gas upstream operations. As we are a client-facing company, over the past decade, we've really begun to support our clients and their operations as they move into new emerging energy spaces. And so several of the topics that we'll discuss today are sort of listed on here, CCS, geothermal, lithium, really all under the larger umbrella of sustainable operations. Over the last 10 years in the bottom right there, it kind of shows we've worked with over 3,800 clients. 3,800 clients served, 630 of them internationally outside of Canada and 65 countries. So next slide, please. These are just a quick example of some of the clients we've worked with in that time frame, many of them on an ongoing basis, and some of them hopefully are familiar to the international crowd here. It just gives you a little bit of flavor of who we've worked with. Some of them obviously are a little bit more Canadian focused and based, and our clients run the scale from small operations to large operators across many industries. And many of these companies are publicly traded. And so we would also assist them with appropriate reporting compliance and disclosure rules. Many are listed publicly here in Canada on the Toronto Stock Exchange, some in the UK, many in the United States on the New York Stock Exchange, and others in Hong Kong. Next slide, John. So here's a little example of many of the countries we've worked in. The dark color shows where we've got some evaluation subsurface expertise. The yellow and red stars are specifically CCUS projects, and then lithium and geothermal projects. And again, these to us really all fall under the larger umbrella of sustainability services that we help our clients with in terms of decarbonization. So anyhow, just give you a little bit of background on us. And I think the next slide we'll hand over to Colleen. Can you move ahead, John? Yeah, okay. Floor is yours, Colleen.
Great. Well, thanks, Jodi, for passing along to me, and welcome everyone to the conversation that we're having. Appreciate your time. With regards to decarbonization and sustainability, that's a fairly new offering from GLJ, but again, as Jodi has said, we're a highly technical organization, one with a history in the energy space, and so we are approaching decarbonization and sustainability very much from that technical expertise. So I am the VP of that group, and really looking forward to sharing some of our insights with you today. Next slide. So how does GLJ view decarbonization? One of the things that I'll just begin with is that I think GLJ is very much aligned with stakeholders, rights holders, clients, and society in general, and that we very much are in support of the energy industry as they pursue sustainability. So we are here to assist and to encourage that aspect of our clients' pursuits. The sustainability strategy, we believe it ensures that you achieve your corporate goals and not compromise the future. So we believe that it's something that is very beneficial to the organizations today, but also beneficial to the future. And also, 'cause as you can see in the image here, is that decarbonization is really just a subset of sustainability. So we hold it as a component within sustainability, with sustainability or ESG being that broader umbrella within which decarbonization takes place. Next slide, please. So, in terms of identifying a decarbonization pathway for an organization, there the wonderful thing is that there's multiple pathways available and many combinations of each of these decarbonization opportunities, which allows each organization to be able to select and consider multiple pathways and find one that makes the most sense for that organization within their own strengths and skills. So some examples, and we'll be going through some of these today, are CCS and CCUS, so carbon sequestration, subsurface carbon sequestration, diversification of assets, electrification of assets, digitization, pure operational efficiencies where a lot of people do start, and then the idea of carbon offsets for when you're getting to a place where you're unable to as effectively and efficiently continue an operational true decarbonization. Next slide. For organizations to pursue a decarbonization pathway, they usually have specific drivers that they follow. Just mentioning three here. So the areas of compliance, incentives, or a voluntary adoption of a decarbonization path. So compliance is when an organizer or a government passes laws that actually make a requirement on organizations within that jurisdiction to reduce their emissions. So within Canada and many places, we are adopting global agreements, which then roll through to the federal legislation. And these can come across in one of two ways normally, either an absolute emission cap, which can be federally mandated, or we can also have percentage reduction requirements. And those are often done from a baseline set within an organization or within a jurisdiction, and then through time, you have to decrease on a year-over-year basis. There's also the possibility of being incentivized to decarbonize. And again, this is usually driven by government. And what they do is either use a carrot or a stick. So in a stick situation, the government actually places a per unit charge on emissions. And that incentivizes organizations to reduce their emissions so that they do not have to pay that charge. Or the government can offer a financial support or incentivize an organization to offset the cost of a technology adoption. So the stick is more the carbon tax, the carrot is more the subsidies or tax credits, and then on top of that, there's potentially some grants, particularly for technology evolution. And then finally, there's the idea about voluntary decarbonization. Oftentimes, that is outside of the legal requirement, but organizations make a voluntary decision to decarbonize for many reasons. Sometimes it's a reputational change or choice. Sometimes it's about the social license to operate within an area, but it also can be driven purely by leadership interest, employee interest, or an organization deciding they want to be a first mover or to differentiate from peers. So those are three just highly generalized reasons for decarbonization. And now we're going to pass it along so we can start talking about some of these decarbonization technologies available.
Right.
Okay,
There you go,
thanks,
Jodi.
John. Yeah, thanks for moving on to that. So, yeah, as Colleen mentioned, we're going to discuss sort of three kind of key technologies, the three, maybe three and a half, if you want to call it that, around the goals of sustainability and decarbonization. First one we talk about is carbon capture and storage, and also how that applies to hydrogen production. So we really view CCS as a wonderful established technology that can be deployed really in most parts of the world today. You know, we're using technologies that have been in place for many years, and the application of which are really well understood. It's just a bit of a new thinking about it. We've been able to capture CO2 from effluent streams for, like I said, for many years. It's really now just doing it on a larger industrial scale and finding appropriate sequestration targets in the subsurface that are truly permanent and safe for storage. So if you can skip to the next slide, John. That's really what this slide tries to portray, are all of the steps required in the proper screening and identification of subsurface targets. And then obviously a big part of that is the full consultation and regulatory considerations, you know, speaking with all stakeholders as they're applied to certain projects. And that can run everywhere from, you know, landowners to governments to First Nations to obviously companies who are looking to, you know, put capital at risk in projects like this. And then a large part of where, you know, GLJ gets involved is on, you know, the true evaluation and modeling of the subsurface targets, planning the field development, planning the future measuring, monitoring, verification, or the MMV plans. And we'll show a quick example here of the next stage two, also on the economic modeling and scenario analysis. And ultimately, companies want to be able to verify and have some assurance that the CO2 is permanently sequestered so that they maybe can apply for some of those carrots that Colleen talked about, where they'll get actual CO2 sequestration credits for permanently storing this. And it's a big project. You know, these are large multi-billion-dollar operations in many cases that involve hundreds of staff. And just for example here, you know, we've built out a staff of 20 to help support our clients, as this is a very growing space in Canada and internationally. Just a couple key partnerships to mention that we've worked with. The International CCS Knowledge Center operates one of the very few industrial scale flue gas CO2 capture facilities in a neighboring province here in Canada, in Saskatchewan, and we partner with them. They are experts on the capture side and operation side, and Carbon Management Canada, who is really at the forefront of MMB projects here in Alberta too. So we really think partnering with companies like that provides a bit of a one-stop shop for our clients, so that they know they're dealing with you know, world experts in all of these areas. Next slide, please, John. So this is just a couple examples. On the left, here in Alberta, the government in 2021 and 2022 went through a pore space application process to allow multiple industries to apply for pore space grants, so that they could come up with permits to really develop and build large-scale industrial CO2 capture hubs and disposal hubs. So 25 of these have been awarded. There's 5-year permits for the companies to kind of sort through what it's going to look like, talk to emitters, make business plans, and then ultimately some, probably not all, but many of these will eventually become operational. Right in the middle along the way, we've highlighted a Quest facility in yellow, and the ACTL, which stands for the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line. These are operational facilities already in Alberta. Quest has been operating for over 5 years already, putting away more than 1 million tons per year of CO2 into just a straight sequestration project. And the ACTL forms a very substantial backbone of Carbon Trunk Line here in Alberta, with the ability to transport over 15 million tons per year of CO2 for sequestration and utilization options along along the length of it, and it's only running now at about 10 to 15% capacity. So lots of operations there. And what we've just superimposed on the background of this, you can sort of make it out hopefully, is the outline of the UK itself, just to give you a feel for the scale of what we're talking about. Many of these operations are obviously hundreds of square miles and square kilometers in size, so very, very substantial. And on the right-hand side, we've overlaid the major emitters here in Alberta. So these are obviously the markets that we're trying to service with these sequestration hubs. There's two very large ones around the large industrial cities, Edmonton in the central part of Alberta, Calgary in the southern part of Alberta. And what you see along the east and the north are major emissions really related to oil sands operations in Alberta. Alberta was obviously blessed with very good geology and deposition of oil. The curse was that they've been biodegraded to the point where they're extremely viscous, where most of us in the reservoir engineering world are working with 1 or maybe 10 centipoise fluids. These can often be tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands centipoise, and really require at this point burning of a large amount of natural gas to create steam to heat it up. So it's a large emission that they've come together to try to create much more sustainable operations going forward. Next slide, John. And as part of this, we've performed many economics analysis on these operations. I mean, these are great operations, and as I said, the technology is very well known and applicable today. The whole questions are, how do we make this economic? How do we scale this out on an industrial scale around the world so that this can really help solve a lot of the problems we're talking about? And so we've done many typical kind of cash flow analyses that many people will be familiar with. What we show here are the pre-production, pre-operational costs of front-end design, building, construction, you name it, and then 25 years of revenue. And we show a couple cases here, one where the revenue for the transport and sequestration is a $15 fee to the emitter, one where it's a $20 fee, and one where it's a $25 fee. So obviously the emitter's paying a fee. We're showing this here as a revenue stream to offset the construction of the sequestration hub. And so you can see over time, we obviously are making revenue above operating expenses. And what we show then is in the middle, sort of the spine of this outcome is the 20 USD per ton CO2 charge that is being recovered here. And this is a cumulative undiscounted cash flow. And you can see obviously on an NPV 0 number, it starts to become very economic. And then a couple key sensitivities off at a high case of $25 and a low case at $15 CO2. So again, as Colleen mentioned, there's a thousand little things that can go in here in terms of incentives, whether that's a carrot or a additional fee that could, or a revenue stream, I guess, that could be provided by different jurisdictions around the world for CO2 sequestration. In Alberta, we actually have both the carbon or the carrot and the stick, and in the U.S., it's really all under the 45Q and enhanced, where it's much more of the carrot, where they get a larger fee per ton of CO2 sequestered. But here in Alberta, we do also have, for example, taxation credits. So much of the capital that you're spending up front can be reimbursed to you as long as you reach certain qualification limits. And again, this varies all the way around the world in terms of what's applicable in the jurisdictions you might be operating in. Next slide, John. And as part of this, we see CCS as a big supporting element inside of hydrogen generation, especially in places such as Western Alberta and the Gulf Coast of the United States, where a large amount of the hydrogen that will be produced there will be blue hydrogen. So obviously that's created through the reformation of natural gas into CO2, but primarily hydrogen, and then a proper handling of the CO2 to sequester it, so that ultimately we end up with a net zero hydrogen at the end of the day with the carbon sequestered in the ground. And again, this is an area where we've worked with clients looking at hydrogen storage. This is generally in large salt caverns in and around the area where the hydrogen is generated. And of course, once hydrogen itself is generated, we're now talking about another transport fuel for use elsewhere. Next slide, John. I think we'll turn it over to you here now to talk about some of the geothermal.
All right, thanks. I'm John Hirschmiller, Senior Geologist at GLJ. Been here for about 10 years, and about the last 5 years, I've been leading the geothermal team on project development, feasibility studies, understanding the potential of geothermal for decarbonization pathway for companies. So I'll get into it pretty quick here. on geothermal. So if you're not familiar with geothermal pretty much can be broken down into two words, earth and heat. So it's energy that's generated by the earth and stored by the earth to create energy that we can use for either electricity generation or heating of commercial or residential buildings. Um, so why is geothermal really helpful for decarbonization efforts? Like I mentioned, is not just for electricity generation like solar and wind. Heating for residential and commercial uses are massive for geothermal and is really underutilized within the world. Unlike other types of green technologies, geothermal is a baseload power source. So it's like having a coal-fired power plant or a natural gas-fired power plant that is a baseload power and is reliable 24/7, 365 days a year. So it's always on, always generating. So looking at geothermal around the world, geothermal is quite underutilized. There's about 1% of the world's or less than 1% of the world's electricity supply is from geothermal. So on this map on the right are geothermal power plants in these green dots. And what really it shows is that geothermal currently really focuses around where there's volcanic activity. So there's a bunch of little yellow stars on this map that show where there's active volcanoes around the world. So what we're really seeing is in big countries with volcanoes like United States, Indonesia, Philippines, Turkey, New Zealand are the big producers of geothermal energy. But there's a lot of new technologies and a lot of momentum right now to tap into other places around the world. So on this map, it's a heat flow map showing kind of geothermal potential. So the red colors are showing high heat flow, which means you have to drill less deep to get geothermal temperatures. So focusing into other things like sedimentary basins, drilling deeper into basement rocks are really starting to get tapped into and understood. So how we can unlock this everywhere else in the world. So looking into geological settings for geothermal, on our left here is what typically has been done over time is looking at hydrothermal systems or volcanic systems. So what has been done is there's been a couple wells that have been drilled, a producer and an injector well close to a heat source. We inject cold water into the subsurface that heats up through the ground, and that hot water is produced in the producer well. However, in the last, I say, decade or so, there's been a lot of activity searching into sedimentary basins, so oil and gas basins that we have a lot of knowledge about. So with sedimentary basins is pretty much derived by a geothermal gradient. So the deeper you drill, the hotter it gets. So we're pretty much limited only by depth then. So how far you can drill. So further you can drill, the hotter you can get, more energy you can produce. Past the sedimentary basins, we start getting into these hot and deep systems, so drilling into basement rock. So there's been some trials worldwide. There's a few commercial projects right now that are targeting basement rock. So they're drilling 2 wells or 3 wells into the basement rock. They're fracturing the wells, and they're flowing flowing water from the injector well to the producer well through a fracture network that is artificially created. So this is where the last 10 years have really come into a technological revolution for geothermal. So on our left side here for the image, we have conventional geothermal, which is pretty much what's been done for most projects around the world. So we have an injector well, producer well, flow it through a reservoir, and we've had this revolution kind of like oil and gas from conventional to unconventional. So we're looking at other ways of tapping this energy source. So the two new technologies, an overshadowing technology of it is advanced geothermal systems, which use a conduction to heat up fluid within the wellbore. So they're putting some kind of working fluid down the wellbore, letting the heat from the reservoir heat up that fluid in the well, and then bring it back up to surface. So there's no interaction with a reservoir. They don't need permeability. They don't need to produce fluids. It's pretty much just a great big underground radiator. And the other one is enhanced geothermal systems. Enhanced geothermal systems are trying to create an artificial reservoir. So where there is no permeability of flow fluid through to gain that flow rate, we're creating a reservoir within that subsurface through fractures to flow that fluid from the injector well to the producer well. So keeping on with this geothermal innovation, there's even more than that. So these are just 4 that technologies I just selected for this presentation. But what we're seeing is projects that are being developed, like let's go clockwise around these. In the top left here is pad development for geothermal. So this is a project in southern Saskatchewan in Canada that are looking at doing horizontal wells, just like oil and gas, having injector producer combination, and stimulating these wells to allow for flow between the injector producers. There's geothermal from oil field brines, where there's a ton of fluid that's coming up with your oil that's hot. So they're taking that hot water that's coming up with your water in your oil field and producing electricity from it. Repurposing oil and gas wells, trying to turn them into heat exchanger underground to generate electricity or heat. Likewise with carbon capture, late life carbon capture projects, after a bunch of CO2 is stored in the ground, what can we actually do with this CO2? Since it has a lower boiling point, temperatures aren't as high needed, or high temperatures aren't as needed. So there's been studies looking into how we can produce a CO2 plume to create geothermal energy from it. Getting on past geothermal, what else we can pull from the subsurface to help with decarbonization? A lot of talk and a lot of pilot projects have been started about trying to extract metals from brines rather than creating a great big mine on surface to mine and have a big environmental footprint. So there's typical metals that can come from brines, such as lithium, manganese, potassium, strontium. The list can go on and on. There's a ton of it, but the big metal that's really been having a lot of focus on lately is lithium. Since lithium is being used for a decarbonization pathway to create batteries for electric vehicles mostly, and battery storage for energy, lithium prices have skyrocketed in the last 3-4 years, and demand is just going out of control for lithium. So we've worked on a few lithium projects worldwide for looking at brines and understanding what the potential is in these brines. So I'm going to get on to where lithium is actually stored. So these are a couple maps. One is of Alberta in Canada, one is just the Western United States, showing lithium concentrations within brines in the subsurface. So what this plan to do, they're in small concentrations in the parts per million, so 100, 150 parts per million, but there's a ton of water that's moved, either from oil field brines, which are pumping hundreds of thousands of barrels a day from some of these reservoirs, or geothermal brines, which are likewise pumping a ton of water from these brines. So, and then they're extracting this lithium or these metals using some kind of membrane, or direct lithium extraction, as they call it, to harness that lithium out of that water stream. So where direct lithium extraction is really environmentally friendly compared to mining techniques, it really shortens the timeline to implement it. We just need to get a reservoir that's producing. You can tap into that reservoir, extract the lithium right from that water stream. It can work right with your technologies right now. So with geothermal, oil field, wherever you have that a source of water, and it's much more environmentally friendly than creating a great big mine, having slurs to evaporate the water and mine the lithium off of that. So for an example of this, there's a company in Germany right now. It's an Australian company. They have a geothermal lithium plant in the Rhine Valley in Germany. So what they're doing in the Rhine Valley is they're producing hot water from the Rhine Valley. They're using that hot water to create geothermal energy. They're taking that water stream and putting it into a DLE, so a direct lithium extractor. They're taking the lithium off that water stream and then re-injecting that into the subsurface. So their footprint in the top left is their mine and wells. This is all we see. It looks like a parking lot and a small building. So they're producing lithium from this, and they're planning to use this for car battery manufacturing, and they're producing lithium today from this. So the environmental footprint is minuscule compared to a great big open pit mine. So I'll pass it back to you, Colleen, here on more decarbonization strategies.
Great. So now we've walked through a few potential technological choices and strategy choices as to how an organization can move towards decarbonization. So we just wanted to very briefly talk about how you would actually make a choice as to which pathway that your organization could follow. Next slide, please. So in very high level, very generically, the idea would be to understand the regulations in your jurisdiction, identify the risks and opportunities specific to your organization, determine the targets that you're trying to achieve and the timelines within which you're trying to achieve them, review your organizational assets and competencies that already exist, consider or propose multiple potential pathways for your organization, and then compare and contrast those selected pathways based on numerous criteria to identify the best choice, the best fit for your organization at that time, and then move forward and execute. Communication we include at the bottom, but really there's communication throughout. But that final communication is the idea that once you're in the execution phase, you're going to want to talk about, showcase, and demonstrate your decarbonization strategy externally as well as internally. Next slide, please. The idea that we talked about at the beginning was that decarbonization is simply a part of the overall ESG or sustainability strategy. But really, when you look at decarbonization in detail, it actually has aspects of ESG within it. So there's environmental aspects, which is what people usually talk about with regards to decarbonization, but recognize that decarbonization, or if decarbonization does not occur, that there's huge social impacts. And also from a governance perspective for your organization, it's important to consider those governance aspects, whether that be regulatory, whether that be reputation. So decarbonization is not just environmental, it is social and governance as well. Next slide, please. And with regards to how GLJ supports companies through this pathway selection, is we offer multiple services that we customize to the needs of an organization, because really it's a conversation and it's a very collaborative and iterative process to help you select what is going to work best for you, because no two organizations are the same, and therefore no two pathways towards decarbonization are going to be exact overlays one to the other. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jodi.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a bunch, John, Colleen, appreciate it. So yeah, I won't go over all these points again, but obviously to us, this is a very broad topic, decarbonization, sustainability. And what we really just tried to highlight today was a few of the, near-term technologies, many of them happening, in brownfield existing operations that really help companies, manage their sustainable future and really decarbonize their operations. So with that, I think we're ready to take any question and answer, Nadia. More than happy to get some involvement from the group that was taking part here again today. So again, thanks for your time. We really do appreciate this.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. It's very inspiring to see how GLJ is enabling the energy transition and decarbonization through different technological solutions. We now have indeed a couple of minutes for a Q&A session. So please, dear viewers, take this opportunity to ask any questions you might have. I'll start with the question for Jodi. You showed us various technologies and their potential, but could you, on a broader scope, in your opinion, tell us what are the biggest challenges in adopting those solutions? And as a second part of the question, how can we overcome these challenges, and how do you see the future of the energy industry in general?
Okay, that's a very good broad question. I'll do my best here to answer that. Yeah, I mean, I think we really believe in technologies being a key driver in the future decarbonization. I think governments, through many of their incentives, and people around the world are obviously all trying to do the right thing. Those of us living in the developed world can certainly make better choices with the way we use energy, but there's just a large part of the world that just has growing energy needs, and it behooves us all to do a better job of helping them provide energy to them that they require to live a stronger, healthier life, with better food choices and what have you. So what I'm getting at, I think, is that I just do see these technologies as being the strongest driver behind it, and government incentives, I think, that are geared around driving technology forward will ultimately be successful. As mentioned, many of these technologies, we're not talking, use the pun, we're not really talking rocket science. These are technologies that have been in use and are in use right now and have been for quite a long time. So really the whole premise I think that we're trying to come at with our clients is review your operations, see what you have existing now that is applicable for these operations. Do some early screening, look to see what might fit the bill, because of course, many of these operations run very different parts of the world, and there won't be one solution that fits everywhere. Perhaps the geothermal and brines are directly up your alley in the areas you work with. And maybe it's not. Maybe we've got areas where we just do have some depleted reservoirs that would be really good for carbon sequestration, or perhaps deep saline aquifers. So, just think about the operations, and then what companies like us and others who help with really is to try to get their head around what that operation might look like, do some pre-screening on economics. Ultimately, I think what will drive it is just the technology curve and learning as these applications become a little bit more widespread into non-traditional parts of the world. I think we'll be able to share through the successes, what works in one area, and maybe avoid the problems where it doesn't work in other parts of the world. So I think it's really just that strong implementation curve that we'll see, Nadia. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you so much. The next question goes to Colleen. As Vice President in Sustainability in the company, could you maybe tell us a little bit how does GLG incorporate sustainability practices into its operation projects? And from your perspective, what are the key considerations that companies should keep in mind when developing sustainability energy projects?
So GLJ approaches sustainability in two ways. One, we incorporate it into our own organizations and our own go-forward business plans. And we obviously also offer it as a service to our clients. So as a consultancy, it's a fairly simple adoption within our own ranks. So it's really more about how can we support our clients, and that really does start with a conversation. So as Jodi has said, and as John has talked about, the idea here is that there's many services or many opportunities for pathways available to clients, and so really we need to be able to advise them through knowledge, and our knowledge of their concerns, their areas of risk, their areas of opportunity, and really catering to their concerns. From that, we will be able to find that most effective strategy. So what is the most effective strategy? The most effective strategy and technology adoption is what's going to be most effective for each individual organization. So what can they actually move forward with? What can they implement successfully? And what is going to serve their purposes over the long term? Because this is not a short time frame that we're talking about. It starts today, but it carries on into the long-term future. So it needs to make sense for each organization.
Makes sense. Thank you for your answer. And another question for John. From a geologist perspective, you talked about various technologies, but one of them was particularly interesting. Maybe you could give a bit more details on the process of metal extraction from brines and its environmental implications compared to traditional extraction methods. And in particular, maybe you also could highlight some regions or geological formations where metal extractions from brines is more viable, and what's the factors that make them suitable?
Right. That's a loaded question, but I'll try my best. As a geologist, if we look at this, I'll start with the environmental footprint of it. So with mining, I'll focus on lithium because that's the most prevalent one right now. So most of the lithium is produced right now in hard rock mining around the world. So we have a great big hard rock mine. They're trying to mine pegmatites, which are great big rock formations that have lithium components in it. So they're taking that, grinding it up, putting it in these salars, which are great big holding ponds of water, and they're waiting for it to evaporate. So in like northern Argentina, for example, there's a ton of lithium production coming out of the world. And what we're seeing is great big open pit mines plus great big evaporation ponds to get lithium extracted from it. So With direct lithium extraction and using it from brines, all we're doing is everything is in the subsurface. So your reservoir is in the subsurface, your metal is in the subsurface. You're producing that water from the subsurface, bringing it to surface, and you're pretty much putting it right through a plant. So the plant has a membrane in it. They're doing a chemical ion exchange of lithium to, or whatever the metal is, to another ion, and they're pulling that ion off of the water stream and collecting that. So what we're really seeing is just a processing plant on surface, and not a very big size. And they're taking that, bringing it right to surface, re-injecting it. So the environmental footprint is very small compared to it, to mining techniques, for example. So what we see a lot for geological formations, so I'm going to really focus on Western Canada here, because personally have a lot of experience in it, is a lot of carbonate reservoirs. So on a geological perspective, a lot of carbonate reservoirs host a lot of these metals. So they're, the water in that reservoir is highly saline. It has metals such as lithium, manganese, potassium, magnesium. This can go on and on. Like, some people are even looking for gold in some of these reservoirs. So it all depends on where you are in the world. If you get a water sample from it, there's geochemistry from that water sample of what kind of metals and minerals are in that water, and focus pretty much on that reservoir. So it all depends where you are, and what kind of environmental or depositional environment it was at that time. But these highly saline reservoirs definitely have a lot of potential for different types of metals in it. The only downside is it is in the parts per million range a lot of the time for these metals. So a lot of water is needed to be moved in these operations, but it's pretty much in the numbers. If you have a ton of water produced out of these reservoirs, you may as well pull off metals off of it while you're producing that water. So hopefully that answered most of that question there.
Yes, thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is up, but thank you to Jodi, Colleen, and John for joining us today and sharing your insights and overview of the technologies that will enable the decarbonization, and also the GLJ vision of the role of technologists in the energy future. We are looking forward to meeting everyone at the Global Energy Week on the 27th, 28th, and 29th of June in London, where we will continue the conversation on decarbonization and technologies, along with other important topics in the industry. You will find the link to the event in comments, and that's it for today. Keep tuned for our next webinars and events. Speak soon.
Okay, thanks, Nadia.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.